If you think the ketogenic diet is just another modern fad designed by influencers to sell you supplements or help you fit into a swimsuit, you have been told only half the story. In fact, you have been missing the most important part. What if I told you that this way of eating wasn't invented for weight loss at all? What if I told you that nearly 100 years ago, and even as far back as 2,500 years ago, this specific metabolic state was the only barrier standing between life and death for thousands of people? We're going to explore a truth that has been buried under decades of pharmaceutical dominance. We're going to look at how a high-fat, low-carbohydrate approach has been used for centuries to treat conditions that terrify us today: epilepsy, and increasingly, the neurodegenerative diseases that threaten to erase our memories and our very selves. This is not about counting calories. This is about biological survival and the ancient programming of your genes. Let's go back in time. Long before we had modern pharmacology, ancient cultures understood a simple but brutal truth. When people stopped eating, certain diseases improved. It sounds counterintuitive, right? But the history of fasting to treat disease is profound. There is evidence suggesting that as far back as 500 BC, fasting was used to treat epilepsy. Imagine the scene: a person seizing uncontrollably, a condition often viewed with superstition. Yet when deprived of food, the seizures would stop. Why? Because the body, in the absence of glucose from food, shifts gears. It changes its fuel source. However, there is a problem with fasting. You cannot fast forever. Eventually, you starve. This was the dilemma facing doctors in the early 20th century. They knew fasting worked for epilepsy, but they needed a way to mimic the metabolic effects of starvation without actually starving the patient. This is where the story gets fascinating. In the 1920s, researchers discovered that if you fed the body very little carbohydrate, a moderate amount of protein, and a very high amount of fat, the body entered the exact same chemical state as fasting. They called it the ketogenic diet. For decades, this was the standard of care for pediatric epilepsy. It worked. It saved lives. But then, the age of pharmaceuticals arrived. New anti-seizure drugs were introduced, and this dietary intervention was pushed into the shadows, dismissed as too difficult or unnecessary. We traded a biological solution for a chemical one. But today, the science is coming back, and it is revealing that this mechanism goes far beyond just epilepsy. To understand why this matters for you, even if you don't have epilepsy, you need to understand what is happening inside your brain right now. Your brain is an energy-hungry organ. In a standard modern diet, it runs on glucose, sugar. But many of us are living in a state of constant inflammation and insulin resistance. We are eating foods that our genes are not designed to handle. We are programmed for a world of scarcity, yet we live in a world of abundance, surrounded by hyperpalatable processed carbohydrates. This mismatch creates a metabolic disaster. When you are constantly flooding your body with sugar and refined carbohydrates, your brain cells can become resistant to insulin. They lose the ability to efficiently process glucose. Essentially, your neurons start to starve, even though there is plenty of fuel around. This energy deficit is now being linked to neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, which some researchers are even calling type 3 diabetes. This is where the ketogenic approach acts as a rescue operation. When you restrict carbohydrates and increase healthy fats, your liver produces ketone bodies, specifically beta-hydroxybutyrate. These ketones are an alternative fuel source. They're like a high-octane, clean-burning fuel for your brain. Unlike glucose, which requires insulin to enter the cell, ketones can bypass that broken machinery and feed your starving neurons directly.
This is why we are seeing such promise in conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It is not magic, it is metabolic engineering. The presence of ketones does more than just provide energy, it signals your body to repair itself. It encourages the mitochondria, the power plants of your cells, to heal. It even promotes a process called apoptosis, where the body cleans out damaged senescent cells that are just taking up space and causing inflammation. It is a deep cleaning for your brain.
Now, you might be thinking, is this safe? Isn't high fat dangerous? This is one of the most common misconceptions. We have been taught to fear fat, but we have been eating it for 2.6 million years. The fat isn't the enemy. The combination of high fat and high sugar is the enemy. That combination is an artificial creation of the modern food industry. When you separate them and you use fat as fuel in the absence of high sugar, the inflammation markers often go down, not up.
There is a very important distinction we must make here, one that often scares people away. You might hear the term ketoacidosis. This is a dangerous, life-threatening condition, usually found in uncontrolled type 1 diabetics. It is not the same as nutritional ketosis. Nutritional ketosis is a natural, safe, and evolutionary state that humans have entered and exited for millennia during periods of winter or famine. Confusing the two is like confusing a gentle rain with a hurricane, just because they both involve water.
So how does this apply to you? If you are struggling with brain fog, if you have a family history of neurodegenerative disease, or if you simply feel that your brain isn't working as sharply as it used to, the problem might be your fuel source. The ketogenic diet acts as a tool. Think of it like a power drill. You don't use a drill for everything, but when you need to punch through a tough wall, nothing else will do.
For those dealing with serious neurological issues, or even just trying to reset their metabolism, moving towards a state of ketosis can be life-changing. It shifts your body from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. It stabilizes the electrical activity in the brain, which is why it works for epilepsy, and it lowers systemic inflammation, which is the root fire of almost all chronic diseases.
You don't need to be perfect from day one, but you do need to understand that your dietary choices are literally constructing your brain. Every bite is a signal. You are either signaling inflammation and degeneration, or you are signaling repair and resilience. The ketogenic diet isn't a new fad. It is an ancient metabolic state that kept our ancestors alive, and it might just be the key to keeping your brain alive today.
If you are considering this, look into sources of healthy fats. Look into MCT oil, which can help boost ketone production even if you aren't perfectly strict. Look at your plate and ask yourself, is this feeding my disease or is this feeding my brain? The power to change your neurological destiny is largely on the end of your fork. Do not wait for a diagnosis to start caring about how your brain produces energy. Fix the roof while the sun is shining.